The desert wind carried the taste of iron and dust through Dry Gulch, coating everything in a fine red film that turned the sunrise into something bloody. Nora Quinn wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of soot across her forehead as she pumped the bellows. The forge roared to life, its heat adding to the already oppressive Arizona morning. "Easy there, Duke," she murmured to the bay stallion tied outside her makeshift smithy. The horse snorted nervously as she approached with the glowing horseshoe gripped in her tongs. At 27, Nora had been shoeing horses for nearly a decade, but the animals never quite got used to the smell of hot metal. The converted stable that served as both her workshop and home wasn't much to look at, warped boards patched with tin, a leather curtain for a door, and a sleeping loft that leaked when the rare rains came. But it was hers, bought with calloused hands and countless nights of mending wagon wheels and sharpening plowshares. "Hold him steady! Billy!" she called to the freckled boy holding Duke's lead. Billy Hutchins was one of the few in town who didn't look at her sideways for wearing trousers and swinging a hammer. The shoe hissed as she plunged it into the water barrel, steam rising like a ghost in the morning light. Duke danced sideways, but Nora's steady hand and low voice calmed him. She'd learned long ago that horses responded better to her than most people did. "That's 4 bits, she said as she lowered Duke's hoof, the new shoe fitting perfectly. "Pa said to put it on his account," Billy mumbled, not meeting her eyes. Nora's jaw tightened. The Hutchins family owed her near $20 already, but she knew their well had gone brackish 2 weeks back. Everyone's had. The communal well in the town square was down to mud and prayers. "Tell your PA that's fine," she said, ruffling the boy's hair. "But next time, I'll need at least half up front." Billy nodded and led Duke away, kicking up small clouds of dust that hung in the still air. Nora watched them go, then turned back to her forge. The day's work was already lined up 3 more horses to shoe, a broken axle to mend, and Mrs. Chen's good skillet to repair, enough to keep her busy until sundown, maybe earn enough to buy another sack of cornmeal and some coffee. The sound of approaching hooves made her look up. A group of riders was coming down Main Street, their horses fresh and their clothes too clean for honest travelers. She recognized the lead rider's silver-studded saddle before she saw his face, Silas Red, the biggest cattle baron in 3 counties, and the kind of man who thought money could wash the blood off anything. Red reined up in front of the communal well, his men fanning out behind him. He was a thick-set man in his 40s, with cold gray eyes and a mustache waxed to points. His foreman, a mean-spirited cuss named Walsh, dismounted and hammered a sign into the ground. "Private property. No trespassing. Water rights reserved." The few townsfolk on the street stopped and stared. Old Mrs. Pike, who ran the boarding house, clutched her water bucket to her chest. The pastor, Reverend Dawson, emerged from his church, Bible still in hand. "You can't do that, Mrs." Pike said, her voice shaking. "That well's been public since the town was founded." Deputy Ike Barnes materialized from the shadows of the jail, moving with the lazy confidence of a man who knew which side his bread was buttered on. He was young for a deputy, maybe 30, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruel twist to his mouth. "Actually, ma'am, Mr. Red here has the papers all legal and proper," Barnes said, producing a document from his vest. "Bought the water rights from the territorial office last week." "That's a lie." Reverend Dawson stepped forward. "Those rights were never for sale." Barnes's hand drifted to his pistol. "You calling me a liar, preacher?" The crowd fell silent. Nora set down her hammer and walked out of her smithy, wiping her hands on her leather apron. She'd seen this play before in Missouri, rich men taking what they wanted while the law looked the other way. "No need for unpleasantness," Red said, his voice smooth as snake oil. "I'm a reasonable man. Folks can buy water from my operation at competitive rates. $2 a barrel." $2, someone gasped. That was more than most families made in a week. "Supply and demand." Red shrugged. "Of course, those who work for me will receive Considerations. Nora felt her temper rising like mercury in a thermometer. She'd fled Missouri to escape men like this, men who thought they could own everything and everyone. Before she could think better of it, she was striding across the street. "And what gives you the right?" she asked, planting herself between Red and the well. Red's eyes traveled from her boots to her soot-stained face, his lip curling. "Well now, if it isn't the lady blacksmith, shouldn't you be making horseshoes instead of speeches? Shouldn't you be herding cattle instead of stealing water?" Nora shot back. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. Walsh dismounted, his spurs jangling as he approached her. He was a big man, used to intimidating people with his size. "Mr. Red asked you a question, woman." "And I asked him one right back," Nora said, not backing down. "Seems to me that paper's about as genuine as a $3 bill." "You need to learn some manners," Walsh growled, reaching for her arm. Nora had grown up with 4 brothers and a father who believed his daughters should know how to defend themselves. She sidestepped Walsh's grab, and his momentum carried him past her. The crowd laughed openly now. Red-faced, Walsh spun around, his hand moving toward his gun. But before he could clear leather, a new voice cut through the tension. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, friend." Everyone turned to see a man leading a limping mule down the street. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and black hair that needed cutting. His clothes were dusty but well-maintained, and he wore his gun with the easy familiarity of someone who knew how to use it but would rather not. "This ain't your concern, stranger," Barnes said. The man tied his mule to a post with unhurried movements. "Maybe not," he agreed. "But I've got business with the blacksmith, and I'd appreciate if you'd let her get back to it. My mule's been limping since Tucson." He had an accent Nora couldn't quite place educated, but with a musical lilt that suggested Spanish or Mexican heritage. His eyes, when they met hers, were the color of good coffee and held a hint of amusement. "Mateo Vega," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Former sergeant, 3rd Cavalry, current farmer and owner of one very stubborn mule." "Nora Quinn," she replied automatically. "I can look at your mule once these gentlemen finish explaining their legal theft." Red's face darkened. "Barnes, arrest her for disturbing the peace." "On what grounds?" Mateo asked mildly. "Asking questions isn't against the law last I checked. Unless the law's changed since I mustered out." Barnes hesitated. Former cavalry carried weight, especially in a territory where Apache raids were still fresh in memory. Red must have sensed the shift in mood because he raised a hand. "No need for arrests. We've made our point." He looked directly at Nora. "But folks might want to think carefully about who they do business with. Would be a shame if certain accidents happen to those who can't show proper respect." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Red and his men mounted up and rode off, leaving the sign standing like a tombstone beside the well. The crowd dispersed slowly, whispering among themselves. Some shot grateful looks at Nora and Mateo, but most hurried away, not wanting to be associated with troublemakers. "Well," Mateo said, leading his mule toward her smithy. "That was interesting." "That was stupid," Nora corrected, her hands shaking now that the confrontation was over. "But thanks for stepping in." "Didn't do much stepping," he said. "You seem to have things well in hand. Now, about this mule." Nora examined the animal's hoof and found a stone wedged deep in the frog. As she worked to extract it, she studied Mateo from the corner of her eye. His hands were calloused but careful as he soothed the mule, and she noticed a worn leather journal peeking from his saddlebag, covered in what looked like surveyor's marks. "You really a farmer?" she asked. "Among other things, I've got a piece of land north of here, near Box Elder Wash. Not much to look at yet, but the soil's good." "If you can water it," Nora said pointedly. He smiled, a quick flash of white teeth. "That's the trick, isn't it? But my father always said the desert holds its own secrets. Just have to know where to look." Something in the way he said it made Nora pause. She finished with the mule's hoof and straightened. "That'll be 4 bits." Mateo paid without haggling, then added an extra quarter. "For the show? Haven't seen anyone stand up to a bully like that since my sergeant faced down a corrupt quartermaster." "Fat lot of good it did," Nora said bitterly. "Come tomorrow. People will be lining up to pay Red's prices." "Maybe. Or maybe they'll remember there's more than one way to find water in the desert." He tipped his hat again. "I'll be back in a few days for new shoes all around. That is, if you're still in business." He led his mule away before she could respond. Nora watched him go. Something about his easy confidence reminding her that not all men were like Red or the ones she'd fled in Missouri. The rest of the day passed in a blur of hot iron and hammer blows. Word of the morning's confrontation spread, and while some customers seemed nervous about associating with her, others made a point of bringing their business. Dr. Hawthorne, the town's elderly physician, even brought her a lunch basket from his housekeeper. "Brave thing you did," he said, watching her eat. "Foolish, but brave." "Seems to be my specialty," Nora said around a mouthful of cornbread. "Just be careful, my dear. Men like Red don't forget slights easily." As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold, Nora finally closed her shop. She climbed to her sleeping loft, exhausted but unable to rest. Through the gaps in the wall, she could see the town settling into an uneasy night. Somewhere a dog barked and a baby cried, normal sounds of life continuing despite Red's threats. She was just drifting off when the smell hit her pine tar, sharp and unmistakable. Nora bolted upright, instantly alert. That smell had no business in her smithy. Creeping down the ladder, she peered into the darkness. A shadow moved near her forge, and she caught the glint of something wet being splashed on her coal bin. "Hey!" she shouted, grabbing a hammer. The figure spun, and in the moonlight, she glimpsed a face she recognized, one of Red's cowboys. He dropped the tar bucket and ran, but the damage was done. The accelerant was already soaking into her fuel supply. Nora spent the next hour hauling the contaminated coal outside, saving what she could. Her hands were black with tar by the time she finished, and her fuel supply was reduced by half. Come morning, she'd need to buy more at inflated prices from Red's company store. No doubt. She sat on her doorstep as dawn approached, watching the eastern sky lighten. The message was clear across Silas Red, and pay the price. But as she flexed her tar-stained fingers, Nora felt her resolve harden like iron in the forge. She'd run from one bully already. She wouldn't run from another. The knock on her door came at dawn. Just as Nora finished scraping the last of the tar from her hands, she expected trouble, maybe Barnes with trumped-up charges, or more of Red's men come to finish what they'd started. Instead, she found Mrs. Pike standing on her threshold, twisting a letter in her weathered hands. "I'm sorry, Nora," the boarding house owner said, not meeting her eyes. "But I've got no choice." Nora took the paper, though she already knew what it would say. The letterhead was from Canyon City Bank, but the signature at the bottom belonged to Silas Red, who'd apparently bought up half the town's debt in the last month. 30 days to pay in full, or I lose the smithy," Nora read aloud. $300. "He bought the note yesterday," Mrs. Pike said miserably. "Right after what happened at the well." $300. It might as well have been $3,000. Nora had maybe $20 saved, and that would need to last until she found a way around Red's water monopoly. "I tried to warn him off," Mrs. Pike continued. "Told him you'd never missed a payment, but he just smiled that snake smile of his." "It's not your fault," Nora said, though her heart felt like lead in her chest. "You need water same as everyone else." After Mrs. Pike left, Nora sat on an overturned bucket and stared at the eviction notice. She'd worked too hard to lose everything now. There had to be a way. Bad news. She looked up to find Mateo Vega standing in her doorway, his mule laden with supplies from the general store. In the morning light, She could see details she'd missed yesterday, the way his shirt, though worn, was carefully mended, and how he carried himself with the straight-backed posture of a military man. "Nothing I can't handle," she said automatically, then laughed bitterly. "Who am I fooling? Red bought my debt. I've got 30 days to come up with $300 or lose everything." Mateo tied his mule and entered uninvited, studying her half-empty coal bins and tar-stained floor. "Busy night." His men paid a visit, contaminated half my fuel supply. And Barnes, probably sleeping off a whiskey breakfast. Nora stood, angry at herself for showing weakness to a near stranger. "Why are you here, Mr. Vega?" "Mateo," he corrected. "And I came to propose a business arrangement." She crossed her arms. "If you're looking for charity work..." "I'm looking for a partner," he interrupted. "Someone who knows this town, isn't afraid of hard work, and has already shown she won't bow to Silas Red." Nora studied him suspiciously. In her experience, men who offered help always wanted something in return. "What kind of partnership?" Instead of answering directly, Mateo pulled out the leather journal she'd noticed yesterday. He opened it carefully, revealing pages covered in Spanish notation, survey marks, and detailed sketches. "My father was a water surveyor for the Spanish crown, then later for Mexico," he explained. "He spent 20 years mapping underground water sources across the territory. When he died, he left me this." Nora leaned closer, intrigued despite herself. The maps were works of art, showing topographical details, rock formations, and mysterious symbols she couldn't decipher. "These marks," Mateo pointed to a cluster of symbols near a familiar landmark, "indicate an underground river, here, beneath Box Elder Wash, deep but accessible." "If that's true, why haven't you dug already?" "Because I need equipment, labor, and someone who understands how to work with iron." He met her eyes. "A well casing will need to be forged, pipes fitted. It's not work I can do alone." The idea sparked in Nora's mind like flint on steel. "And in return, we share the water rights. Build a communal well that Red can't touch because it's on my land, drawing from a source that predates his supposed claim. He'll fight it. Let him. I've faced Apache warriors and Confederate cavalry. A bloated cattle baron doesn't scare me." Something in his calm certainty was contagious. Nora found herself studying the journal more carefully, tracing the path of the supposed underground river. "Why trust me?" she asked. "You barely know me?" Mateo closed the journal. "My father taught me to judge people by their actions. Yesterday, you stood alone against 6 armed men for the principle of the thing. That tells me enough." Before Nora could respond, footsteps approached the smithy. "Doctor." Hawthorne appeared, slightly out of breath and carrying his medical bag. "Ah, good. You're both here," the elderly physician said. "Saves me a trip. Mr. Vega, I heard you were in town. I wonder if I might examine that arm of yours, the one you favor when you think no one's looking." Mateo's jaw tightened. "It's fine." "Humor an old man." "Doctor," Hawthorne insisted, "Miss Quinn won't charge you for the consultation." Reluctantly, Mateo rolled up his sleeve, revealing an angry scar that ran from elbow to wrist. The doctor examined it with practiced hands. "Saber?" he asked. "Apache lance. Last patrol before I mustered out." "You're lucky to have use of it at all. The muscle damage." "Doctor," Hawthorne trailed off, then looked at Nora. "He'll need help with any heavy digging. That arm won't take the strain." "I can manage," Mateo said stiffly, rolling his sleeve down. "Of course you can," Nora said, understanding male pride well enough. "But partners help each other, don't they?" He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "I suppose they do." "Doctor," Hawthorne beamed like a matchmaker at a wedding. "Excellent. Now, since we're all here, perhaps we should discuss who else might be interested in this venture. I know Widow Pike has a bit saved, And young Tommy Brennan's strong enough to dig when he's not working the livery. You knew about the water? Nora asked. I've been here 30 years, my dear. Not much escapes these old eyes, including, he lowered his voice, the fact that Barnes is planning to search your smithy tonight. Something about looking for stolen goods. Nora's fists clenched. Stolen goods I've never seen, no doubt. No doubt, which is why I suggest you accept Mr. Vega's offer to store your tools at his ranch today. For safekeeping, of course. The conspiracy was forming so quickly Nora's head spun. But what choice did she have? Fight alone and lose everything? Or trust these men and maybe, just maybe, win? All right, she said. But we do this properly. Written agreements, shared labor, shared risk. Agreed, Mateo said immediately. They spent the morning loading Nora's essential tools onto a borrowed wagon. The work was hard in the growing heat, and she noticed Mateo struggling with the heavier items despite his attempts to hide it. Without making a fuss, she partnered with him on the anvil and larger equipment, matching her strength to compensate for his weakness. Thank you, he said quietly as they secured the last load. Partners, remember? She replied. The journey to Mateo's ranch took them through country that grew more desolate with each mile. The land was all rust-colored rock and stubborn scrub brush, baked hard under the merciless sun. But as they crested a rise, Nora saw his place nestled in a natural bowl between two ridges. It wasn't much a small adobe house with a thatched roof, a corral made of ocotillo ribs, and a struggling garden defended from rabbits by a fence of woven brush. But everything was clean, orderly, and showed signs of constant care. It's not grand, Mateo said, a note of defiance in his voice. It's honest work, Nora replied, meaning it. More than most can say. He showed her where to store her tools in a sturdy shed, then led her to his well, a deep shaft that yielded only enough water to keep his garden barely alive. The new well would be there. He pointed to a spot near a cluster of cottonwood saplings. My father's notes say the water table dips close to the surface where those trees grow. They sat in the shade of his porch, sharing water from his precious supply and planning their next moves. The intimacy of it sitting with a man on his own land, discussing a shared future, made Nora oddly nervous. She'd been alone so long she'd forgotten what partnership felt like. I should tell you, she said abruptly, why I left Missouri. Mateo waited, not pushing. My father arranged a marriage to a man who owned the neighboring farm. Samuel Morrison was his name, 40 years old, widowed twice, with a reputation for... She paused, choosing her words carefully, using his fists when words failed him. You ran, Mateo said. It wasn't a question. The night before the wedding, took my savings, my tools, and my mother's anvil. Been moving west ever since. Do they look for you? Probably not. A runaway bride isn't worth much effort. But sometimes I wonder if I'll ever stop running. Mateo was quiet for a moment, then said, My mother was Tohono O'odham. My father was Spanish, in Mexico. We were too Indian. Here, we're too Mexican. I joined the cavalry to prove I was American enough, and all I proved was that I could bleed like anyone else. The shared confession hung between them, creating an unexpected bond. Nora felt some of her wariness ease. We should head back, she said finally. If Barnes is planning something... The sound of approaching horses cut her off. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the afternoon sky. Even at a distance, she recognized the lead rider's mustache. Red, Mateo said grimly. The cattle baron and his men descended slowly, taking their time. Red's eyes swept the property with the calculating gaze of a man pricing out everything he saw. Sergeant Vega, Red said pleasantly. I heard you were back. Shame about your father. He was a good man, even if he did have peculiar ideas about water rights. Mr. Red, Mateo replied evenly. I couldn't help but notice you have company. Red's gaze settled on Nora. Miss Quinn. Isn't it dangerous for a lady to be unchaperoned so far from town people might talk? Let them, Nora said. Such spirit. I do admire that in a woman. To a point. Red dismounted uninvited, his men following suit. I actually came to make you an offer. Sergeant, this land of yours, it's not worth much as is, but I could use the grazing rights. I'd pay fair market value. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price. What would it take? $1,000 too. The sums were staggering more money than most people saw in a lifetime. Nora held her breath, waiting for Mateo's response. My father's buried on this land, Mateo said simply. So no, Mr. Red, not for any price. Red's friendly mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold underneath. That's a shame. This territory can be dangerous for a man alone. Accidents happen. Apache raids, though rare these days, still occur. Bandits. Drought. A wise man knows when to cut his losses. A wise man also knows the difference between a business offer and a threat. Mateo replied. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Finally, Red remounted his horse. Think about it, Sergeant. My offer won't stand forever. And Miss Quinn, he touched his hat brim mockingly. You might want to check your smithy when you return. I hear Deputy Barnes found some interesting items during his search. They watched the riders disappear over the ridge. Only then did Nora realize she'd been holding a hammer, ready to fight if necessary. We need to get back, she said. Wait. Mateo disappeared into his house and returned with an old Spencer rifle. If we're partners, we watch each other's backs. They made the ride to town in record time, arriving to find a crowd gathered outside Nora's smithy. Barnes stood in the doorway, holding up a silver pocket watch. Found this hidden in the coal bin, he announced. Matches the description of one stolen from Mr. Red last month. That's a lie, Nora pushed through the crowd. I've never seen that watch before. Then how do you explain it being in your shop? Barnes smiled unpleasantly. I'm afraid I'll have to arrest you. Miss Quinn, Judge Harlan will sort this out when he makes his circuit next month. A month in jail would mean losing everything for certain. Nora felt the trap closing around her. Hold on. Doctor, Hawthorne pushed forward. That watch, let me see it. Barnes hesitated but couldn't refuse the respected physician. Doctor. Hawthorne examined the watch carefully, then smiled. How interesting. This watch has an inscription, To Esser, from the Canyon City Cattlemen's Association, 1880. Those are Mr. Red's own initials, aren't they? The crowd murmured. Barnes's face flushed. Furthermore, the doctor continued, this particular model wasn't manufactured until 1881. Rather difficult for it to have been presented in 1880, wouldn't you say? You calling Mr. Red a liar? Barnes blustered. I'm calling this evidence suspect. Any judge worth his salt would throw this case out. Unless, of course, you'd like me to telegraph the territorial marshal about possible corruption in our law enforcement. Barnes looked like he'd swallowed a rattlesnake. Without another word, he pocketed the watch and stormed off, the crowd dispersing behind him. Thank you, Nora said to Dr. Hawthorne. Don't thank me yet, the old man replied grimly. This was just the opening move. Red won't stop until he owns everything worth having in this town, including, I suspect, whatever water source young Mr. Vega's father discovered. Mateo stepped closer to Nora. Then we'd better find it first. As night fell over Dry Gulch, Nora stood in her ransacked smithy, surveying the damage. Her tools were scattered, her papers strewn about, but nothing irreplaceable was broken. She'd survived the first assault. Tomorrow we start digging, Mateo asked from the doorway. Tomorrow we start fighting back, Nora corrected. She held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, he shook it. His grip was firm, calloused, and surprisingly gentle. Partners it was. Then, against Silas Red, against the drought, against anyone who tried to steal what little hope this town had left. Nora Quinn had run far enough. It was time to make a stand. The first strike of the pickaxe rang across Box Elder Wash like a church bell, echoing off the red rock walls. Nora brought the tool down again, feeling the impact jar through her arms as metal met stubborn earth. The ground here was different from the sandy soil near Town Harder, older, keeping its secrets close. Easy, Mateo said, consulting his father's journal. According to these notes, we need to go at an angle. The water follows a limestone shelf about 20 feet down. Their small crew had assembled at dawn. Nora, Mateo, widow Abigail Pike with her sleeves rolled up and her gray hair pinned back, Dr. Hawthorne supervising from the shade, and young Tommy Brennan, a gangly orphan of 15 who worked at the livery stable and jumped at any chance to earn an extra dime. 20 feet. Tommy whistled. That's a powerful lot of digging. Then we'd better get started, Abigail said briskly. She might have been 60, but years of running a boarding house had given her arms like iron. Tommy, you and I will haul the buckets. Nora and Mr. Vega can take turns with the picking. They worked in shifts as the sun climbed higher, turning the wash into an oven. Nora had stripped down to her work shirt and trousers, scandalizing propriety but practical in the heat. Sweat ran in rivers down her back as she swung the pickaxe, each strike revealing another layer of the earth's history: red clay, white caliche, gray shale. You're pushing too hard, Mateo observed during one of her breaks. He handed her a cup of warm water from their precious supply. Pace yourself. The desert doesn't respect hurry. We don't have time for patience, Nora argued, but she drank gratefully. Red's not going to sit idle while we dig, as if summoned by his name. Dust appeared on the horizon. 3 riders approached at an easy walk, and Nora recognized the stocky form of Walsh, Red's foreman, flanked by 2 cowhands. Trouble, Tommy muttered, moving closer to the pile of tools. But the riders stopped at a respectful distance. Walsh dismounted and walked forward, his hands visible and away from his guns. Morning, folks, he called out. Mister, Red wanted me to check on your project. Since when does Red care about our welfare? Abigail asked sharply. Walsh grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. Oh, he's mighty interested in what you're doing. Digging for buried treasure, maybe? Or could it be you're looking for water on private land? This is my land, Mateo said evenly. Is it now? Walsh pulled out a folded paper. Funny thing about land claims. Sometimes the boundaries ain't as clear as folks think. Mister, Red's had his lawyers looking into it, and seems like this wash might just be part of his holdings after all. That's impossible. Mateo's voice hardened. My father filed this claim in '68. Well, that's for the courts to decide. In the meantime, Mister, Red's generous enough to let you keep digging. After all, if you do find water, it'll save him the trouble when he takes possession. He remounted and the 3 riders departed, leaving a cold weight in Nora's stomach despite the heat. Empty threats, Doctor, Hawthorne said, but his usual confidence seemed shaken. Maybe, Mateo said quietly. But Red didn't become rich by making empty threats. They returned to digging with renewed urgency. By noon, they'd made a pit 6 feet deep and twice as wide. The work was grueling, and Nora noticed Mateo favoring his scarred arm more with each swing. Take a break, she ordered during the next shift change. I'm fine. No, you're not. She grabbed his wrist, feeling the muscles trembling with fatigue. You're no good to us crippled. Rest. For a moment, she thought he'd argue. Then he set down the pickaxe and climbed out of the pit. Yes, ma'am, he said with a wry smile. It was late afternoon when Tommy's shout brought everyone running. The boy was in the pit, pointing excitedly at a dark stain spreading across the eastern wall. Look, it's damp. Nora dropped into the hole and pressed her hand against the soil. It came away moist. We're close. They dug with fresh energy, following the dampness. Another 2 feet down. Mateo's pickaxe broke through into a pocket of gravel that began weeping water, not a gush, but a steady seep that promised more. "Hand me the rod," Mateo called. They'd brought a length of iron pipe, which he drove deeper into the gravel. The seep increased to a trickle, then a steady flow. Within minutes, water was pooling at the bottom of their pit. "We did it," Tommy breathed, then louder, with a whoop, "We did it!" Abigail burst into tears, and even Dr. Hawthorne's eyes looked suspiciously moist. Nora found herself grinning like a fool, until she caught Mateo's expression. Instead of celebrating, he was staring at the water with a frown. "What's wrong?" "This is just the beginning," he said. "We need to shore up the walls, dig deeper to reach the main flow, build a proper well housing." "But we found water," Nora protested. "We found promise," he corrected. "Now comes the hard part." A distant rumble made them all look up. To the north, clouds were building not the white puffs of fair weather, but dark, anvil-shaped thunderheads. "Storm coming," Dr. Hawthorne observed. "We should get back to town." But Mateo was already moving, grabbing shovels. "Help me build a berm around the pit. If flash flooding hits, we'll lose everything we've dug." They worked frantically as the wind picked up, piling earth and rocks in a protective ring. The first fat raindrops were falling as they loaded tools onto the wagon. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, the storm had arrived in earnest. Rain in the desert was like nothing Nora had experienced in Missouri. It didn't fall so much as a salt, turning the streets into rivers within minutes. Lightning split the sky, thunder shaking the buildings. "My smithy," Nora shouted over the storm. The structure's patched roof wouldn't survive this assault. "My place is closer," Abigail called back. "Everyone inside?" They crowded into the boarding house kitchen, dripping and exhausted. Abigail stoked the stove and put coffee on, while Tommy toweled off his hair. "Well," the boy said cheerfully, "at least we don't have to worry about drought anymore." As if in response, hail began hammering the roof. Through the window, Nora watched dice the size of marbles bouncing off the boardwalk. "The pit," she said with growing horror. "If this keeps up—" "Nothing we can do now," Mateo said. He'd shed his wet shirt, and Nora tried not to stare at the network of scars across his back and shoulders. Whatever battles he'd fought in the cavalry had left their marks. "You're hurt, Doctor," Hawthorne said, noticing fresh blood on Mateo's arm where the old wound had reopened. "It's nothing." "Sit," the doctor ordered in a tone that brooked no argument. As he cleaned and rebandaged the wound, he said casually, "You know, I've been thinking about our legal situation." "What about it?" Abigail asked, handing out cups of coffee. "Well, it occurs to me that I've lived here longer than most. Long enough to remember when old Miguel Vega first filed his claim. I even witnessed his signature." Mateo looked up sharply. "You knew my father." "Treated him for snakebite once. Good man, very careful about his paperwork." The doctor tied off the bandage. "In fact, I might still have some of those documents in my files. Carbon copies. You understand, for medical records." A silence fell over the kitchen, broken only by the drumming of rain. "Doc," Nora said slowly, "are you saying you have proof of Mateo's land claim?" "I'm saying I'm a pack rat who never throws anything away. Whether any old papers I might have would stand up in court—" He shrugged. "Well, that's another matter." The storm raged for 2 hours, turning Dry Gulch into a series of temporary lakes. When it finally passed, leaving the air smelling of sage and wet earth, they ventured out to survey the damage. Nora's smithy had survived, though barely. Water streamed through a dozen new leaks, and one wall leaned at a worrying angle, but it was still standing. "I'll help you shore it up," Mateo offered. "We need to check the well first," Nora insisted. They borrowed horses from the livery. Tommy's employer was sympathetic to their cause and rode back to Box Elder Wash. The setting sun painted the wet rocks in shades of copper and gold, and every depression had become a mirror reflecting the sky. Nora's heart sank as they crested the ridge, where their neat pit had been. A mess of mud and debris sprawled across the wash. The flash flood had overwhelmed their protective berm, filling the excavation with silt. All that work, Tommy said miserably. But Mateo was already dismounting, wading into the muck. He found the iron rod they'd driven and pulled. It came free with a sucking sound, followed by a gurgle of muddy water. "The spring's still there," he announced. "We'll have to dig it out again, but the water source is intact." "How can you be so calm?" Nora demanded. "We just lost a full day's work." "Because I've learned the desert's lessons," Mateo replied, scraping mud from his hands. "It gives and takes in equal measure. The same storm that filled our well also filled every catch basin and rock pool for miles. The cattle will have water for weeks. Red's pressure just eased." He was right, Nora realized. Already, she could hear water trickling in the side canyons, temporary streams that would vanish in days but would provide relief in the meantime. "We'll start again tomorrow," Abigail said firmly. "And this time, we'll be smarter about it." As they rode back to town, Mateo pulled alongside Nora. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up. For being angry at the setback instead of defeated by it." He smiled. "My father used to say that the desert respects fighters more than philosophers." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was. He also said that water always finds its level, and truth always finds its way to the surface." They reached town to find an unexpected gathering at the church. Reverend Dawson had opened the doors for an impromptu meeting, and half the town seemed to be inside. "What's happening, Doctor?" Hawthorne asked a woman hurrying past. "Red's raised the water prices again," she said breathlessly. $3 a barrel now. Says the storm damaged his wells." Inside the church, voices raised in anger and fear. Red stood at the front, flanked by Barnes and several armed men, addressing the crowd with oily sincerity. "I understand your concerns," he was saying, "but business is business. Of course, I'm always looking for good workers. Anyone who signs on with my outfit gets water at the old rates." "That's extortion," someone shouted. "That's economics," Red replied smoothly. His eyes found Nora and Mateo as they entered. "Though I hear some folks are trying to dig their own wells. Dangerous business. That, all sorts of accidents can happen. Cave-ins, bad water, Indian attacks." "The Apache are peaceful," Mateo said loudly. "Have been for years." "Mostly peaceful," Red corrected. "But desperate men do desperate things. Why, just last month, a ranch north of here was burned, whole family killed." The crowd murmured uneasily. Nora saw the fear Red was sowing and felt her temper rise. "The only desperate men I see are the ones hiding behind hired guns," she called out. The church fell silent. Red's face darkened. "Miss Quinn, I'd hoped your recent troubles might have taught you some manners. My troubles taught me that when you can't win fair, you cheat. When you can't buy, you steal. And when you can't convince, you threaten." She stepped forward, addressing the crowd now instead of Red. "You all know me. I've shod your horses, fixed your tools, worked alongside you. I'm telling you now we found water today. Good water, free for anyone who helps dig for it." "She's lying," Barnes interjected. "Am I?" Nora turned on him. "Then why did Red send his men to spy on us? Why is he so worried about what we're doing out at Box Elder Wash?" "Because you're on my land," Red snapped, losing his composure. "Prove it," Mateo challenged. "In court, with real documents, not forgeries." The two men stared at each other across the church. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and someone whispered that more storms were coming. "This town needs law and order," Red said finally. "Not rabble-rousers and foreign agitators. Deputy Barnes will be keeping a close eye on all illegal activities." He stalked out, his men following. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several people approached Nora and Mateo. "Is it true?" asked Mrs. Chen, who ran the laundry. "You found water." "We found it," Nora confirmed. "But we need help to secure it. Diggers, builders, anyone who can spare time and muscle." "I can't dig," Mrs. Chen said, "but I can cook for those who do." "My boys can help," said another woman. "They're strong." One by one, commitments trickled in. Not everyone fear still held many back, but enough to make a difference. As the impromptu meeting broke up, "Doctor," Hawthorne pulled Nora and Mateo aside. "I found those documents I mentioned. Come by my office tomorrow. And be careful tonight, Red's not one to let challenges go unanswered." They parted ways in the darkening streets. Mateo walked Nora to her smithy, both of them alert for trouble. "Stay with Abigail tonight," he suggested. "Your place isn't secure. I won't be driven from my home." "Stubborn woman." "Stubborn man." They smiled at each other, and for a moment, the air between them crackled with something that had nothing to do with the lingering storm. "Tomorrow, then," Mateo said softly. "Tomorrow," Nora agreed. She watched him disappear into the darkness, then barricaded her door and climbed to her loft. Through the gaps in the wall, she could see lights burning late at Red's big house on the hill. Planning, no doubt, scheming. Let him scheme, she thought. They had water, they had allies, and they had hope. In the desert. Sometimes that was enough. Thunder rolled across the valley again, and Nora fell asleep to the promise of rain. The makeshift courtroom smelled of sweat and tobacco, packed with more people than the town hall had ever held. Judge Cornelius Blackwood, a circuit judge known for his fairness and iron spine, sat behind a table that served as his bench. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, and his eyes missed nothing as they swept the crowd. "This hearing," Judge Blackwood announced, his voice cutting through the murmur, "will determine the rightful ownership of the disputed land at Box Elder Wash. Mr. Silas Red, you may present your case." Red's lawyer, a slick man from Tucson named Pemberton, stood with a folder thick with documents. "Your Honor, my client's claim is clear. He purchased the water and mineral rights to a significant portion of land that includes Box Elder Wash. I have here the deed of transfer, properly notarized and filed with the territorial office." He presented his papers with a flourish. Nora, sitting beside Mateo in the front row, felt her heart sink. The documents looked official, covered in seals and signatures. "Furthermore," Pemberton continued, "the defendant, Mr. Vega, has been trespassing on this land and illegally extracting water. We ask that he be ordered to cease all operations and pay damages to my client." Judge Blackwood examined the papers carefully. "These appear to be in order. Mr. Vega, do you have representation?" Mateo stood. "I'll speak for myself, Your Honor." "That's your right. Present your defense." Mateo pulled out his father's journal and a worn leather portfolio. "Your Honor, my father filed claim to that land in 1868, 15 years before Mr. Red arrived in the territory. Here are the original documents, including the surveyor's report and the territorial seal." Pemberton jumped up. "Those documents are in Spanish, Your Honor," without proper translation. "I read Spanish, Mr. Pemberton," Judge Blackwood said dryly. "Continue, Mr. Vega." "My father mapped the water sources throughout this region for the Mexican government. Then later, for the territory of Arizona, his claim was based on established water rights that predate any subsequent sales." "If I may, Your Honor." "Doctor," Hawthorne stood from the gallery, "I have additional evidence." "And you are?" "Dr. Elias Hawthorne. I've practiced medicine in Dry Gulch for 30 years. I witnessed Miguel Vega's original claim filing and have maintained copies in my records." He produced a stack of carbon copies, yellowed with age but clearly showing the same information as Mateo's documents. plus additional territorial stamps. Pemberton's confident expression wavered. Your Honor, these could be forgeries. Are you accusing me of fraud, young man, Doctor? Hawthorne's voice was steel. I've delivered half the babies in this county and closed the eyes of the other half. My word has been good enough for 3 governors. No accusation intended. Pemberton backpedaled. Judge Blackwood studied all the documents for long minutes. Finally, he looked up. Mr. Pemberton, there's a discrepancy here. Your client's deed is dated 1883 but references a survey from 1882. However, the surveyor named one Charles Whitman died in 1881. I know because I attended his funeral. The courtroom buzzed. Red's face flushed red. There must be a clerical error, Pemberton stammered. Indeed, a significant one. The judge's voice was cold. Additionally, the territorial seal on your document appears to be the current version, implemented 6 months ago. Strange for a document supposedly filed last year. Your Honor, I've seen enough. The court finds that the land in question, including all water and mineral rights, belongs to Mateo Vega as heir to Miguel Vega's legitimate claim. Mr. Red's documents are suspect at best, fraudulent at worst. Case dismissed. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered. Others sat in shocked silence. Red shot to his feet. This is preposterous, I'll appeal. That's your right, Judge Blackwood said calmly. But until then, my ruling stands. Sheriff, he paused. Where is the sheriff? Indisposed, Barnes said from the back of the room. I see. Well, whoever's maintaining order, ensure Mr. Vega's property rights are respected. Court adjourned. The crowd began filing out. Voices raised in excitement and argument. Nora grabbed Mateo's arm as he gathered his papers. You did it. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The law's on our side, whether that matters to men like Red. They emerged into blazing sunshine to find their supporters gathering around Abigail. Tommy, Mrs. Chen, and a dozen others who'd been helping at the well. We should celebrate, Abigail suggested. We should get back to the dig, Mateo countered. Red won't take this quietly. He was right to be cautious. They'd barely left town when riders appeared behind them, not Red's usual cowboys, but hard-looking men Nora didn't recognize. Hired guns, Mateo said quietly. Keep moving, don't run. The riders followed at a distance, making no effort to hide their presence. By the time they reached Box Elder Wash, Nora's nerves were wire-tight. Their celebration turned to dismay when they saw the dig site. The careful work of clearing the flood damage had been undone. Fresh dirt and rocks filled the pit, and their tools were scattered or broken. Those bastards, Tommy breathed. Language, Abigail said automatically, though her own face was grim. Mateo examined the damage with the eye of someone who'd seen worse. They were in a hurry. Did it last night. Probably. Look, they didn't find the actual spring. He was right. Beneath the hastily piled debris, water still seeped. We dig it out again, Nora said firmly. And this time, we post guards. They worked through the afternoon heat, everyone taking shorter shifts to accommodate the increased labor. The hired guns watched from the ridge, making no move to interfere, but their presence a constant threat. It was Tommy who spotted the dust cloud coming from town. Riders coming, lots of them. Nora gripped her shovel like a weapon, but as the group drew closer, she recognized friendly faces. Reverend Dawson led them, accompanied by 24 townspeople. Heard you might need help, the Reverend said, dismounting. Seemed like a good day for the congregation to do some charitable work. With the reinforcements, the work went quickly. They not only cleared the pit but expanded it, following the water flow. By sunset, they had a proper well beginning to take shape, with timber supports and the beginnings of a stone lining. The hired guns had disappeared when the crowd arrived, but nobody doubted they'd be back. We should head back, Reverend Dawson suggested as darkness fell. Safety in numbers. They made a convoy returning to town, but at the outskirts, Tommy grabbed Nora's arm. Look! Smoke rose from the direction of her smithy. Nora spurred her borrowed horse. Racing through the streets with Mateo close behind, they found a crowd already forming a bucket brigade, but the fire had taken hold of the roof. My tools! Nora started forward, but strong hands held her back. Too dangerous, Mateo said. The roof's about to go. As if to prove him right, the structure groaned and partially collapsed, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. Nora watched months of work disappear in smoke and flame. I'm sorry, someone said. We tried, but it went up so fast. Coal oil, Nora thought numbly. They doused it with coal oil. Miss Nora, Billy Hutchins pushed through the crowd, his face smudged with soot. I saved what I could. He'd piled several of her essential tools at a safe distance. Her good hammer, a set of tongs, some smaller implements. Not much, but something. Thank you, Billy, she managed. This has gone too far. Doctor, Hawthorne said, his usual calm shattered. First sabotage, now arson. Where's the law? Right here, Barnes drawled, strolling up with his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. Shame about the fire, these old buildings, all that coal oil and metal shavings. Accidents happen. This was no accident, Mateo said coldly. Prove it, Barnes challenged. Unless you saw someone set it. The crowd muttered angrily, but without witnesses. They all knew Barnes was right. Red had chosen his moment carefully. You can rebuild, Abigail said, putting her arm around Nora. Stay at my place tonight. We'll figure things out in the morning. But Nora barely heard her. Everything she'd worked for, gone. Her home, her livelihood, her independence all reduced to ash and twisted metal. No, she said quietly. Nora. No, her voice rose. I won't be driven out. I won't run again. She looked at the crowd, her face streaked with soot and tears she refused to acknowledge. Red thinks he can break us one at a time, pick us off like sheep, but we're not sheep. She walked to the pile of tools Billy had saved and picked up her hammer. It was still warm from proximity to the fire, but solid in her hand. Tomorrow, we dig, we shore up that well, and we make it so strong that nothing not floods, not sabotage, not all of Red's hired guns can take it from us. Who's with me? I am, Mateo said immediately. Count me in, Tommy added. One by one, voices joined them. Not everyone fear still held many back, but more than before. The fire meant to break them had forged something stronger. You're all fools. Barnes spat. Red owns this town. He owns the water, the land, the future. You think one well will change that? Yes, Doctor, Hawthorne said simply. Because that well represents something Mr. Red can't buy or burn hope. Barnes's hand twitched toward his gun. But even he wasn't foolish enough to draw on an unarmed crowd. He stalked off, no doubt to report to his master. As the crowd dispersed, Mateo approached Nora. You don't have to do this alone, he said softly. I know. She looked at the smoking ruins of her smithy. But I need to stand here for a moment, to remember. He understood, stepping back to give her space. But he didn't go far. And when she finally turned away from the ashes, he was there. They walked to Abigail's boarding house in silence. The older woman had prepared a room, and Nora found herself in a real bed for the first time in years, staring at a ceiling that didn't leak. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Mateo entered, carrying something wrapped in cloth. This was in the shed at my place, he said, unwrapping a leather tool roll. My father's metalworking tools. He'd want someone to use them who understood their worth. Nora opened the roll, revealing beautifully maintained implements, hammers, tongs, files, all of quality steel. Her throat tightened. I can't. Partners, remember? He set them on her dresser. We share the losses and the gains. After he left, Nora held one of the hammers, testing its weight and balance. Perfect, like it had been waiting for her hand. She thought of her father's anvil, lost now in the ruins, of the life she'd built and lost, of the man who'd offered her tools and hope when she had neither. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Red wouldn't stop, and Barnes would be looking for any excuse to arrest them. But tonight, she had a roof over her head, friends who stood by her, and tools to work with. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. Sleep came eventually, and with it, dreams of water flowing freely across the desert, turning the dead land green. In her dream, she stood at the well with Mateo, watching their neighbors draw bucket after bucket of clear, cold water. She woke before dawn to the sound of rain on the roof, gentle this time, not the violent storms of before. Rising, she dressed in her salvaged work clothes and crept downstairs. Mateo was already in the kitchen, talking quietly with Abigail over coffee. "Couldn't sleep either?" Abigail asked. "Too much to do," Nora replied, accepting a cup gratefully. "I've been thinking," Mateo said. "We need to protect the well site, build a proper structure around it, maybe even a small guardhouse." "With what money?" Nora asked bitterly. "With this," Abigail said, placing a small leather pouch on the table. "My savings. It's not much, but it'll buy lumber and supplies." "Abigail, no. Don't argue, girl. What good's money if we die of thirst besides?" She smiled. "I'm investing in the future. When that well comes in proper, this boarding house will be the best watered establishment in Arizona." Before Nora could respond, Tommy burst through the door. "You need to see this," he gasped. "At the well, come quick." They grabbed weapons and horses, racing through the pre-dawn darkness. Nora expected to find more destruction, but instead, Tommy led them to the ridge overlooking the site. Below, in the gray morning light, at least 30 people worked at the well. Some she recognized from yesterday, but others were new families who'd stayed quiet before, now wielding shovels and hauling rocks. "They started arriving at midnight," Tommy explained. "Said they were tired of being afraid." Nora and Mateo descended to find organized chaos. Someone had drawn up plans for proper well construction. Others were building a stone wall around the site. A cooking station had been established, with Mrs. Chen directing operations. "About time you got here," she called out. "We need someone who knows ironwork to start on the pump assembly." For the first time since watching her smithy burn, Nora smiled. "Then let's get to work." The sun rose on a transformed site. What had been a simple pit was becoming a proper well, built by the hands of people who refused to be broken. Red could burn buildings. He could hire guns and corrupt lawmen, but he couldn't burn the human spirit, and he couldn't corrupt hope. The water was there, waiting. All they had to do was dig deep enough to find it. The anonymous letter arrived at dawn, slipped under Abigail's door while the house still slept. Nora found it when she came down for coffee, her name written across the envelope in neat, unfamiliar script. "What's that?" Mateo asked, entering the kitchen with his hair still damp from washing. Nora opened the letter, her face hardening as she read. Without a word, she handed it to him. "Mateo Vega is not what he seems." Mateo read aloud. "He's made a deal with Red the Water Map for $5,000 and safe passage out of the territory. He's using you to dig the well. Then he'll sell you all out. A concerned friend." The kitchen fell silent except for the bubbling coffee pot. Abigail, who'd been cutting bread, set down her knife. "Well?" she asked. "What do you have to say?" Mateo's jaw tightened. "That someone wants us divided." "That's not a denial," Nora observed, her voice carefully neutral though her hands gripped her coffee cup too tightly. "You want me to deny it? Fine, I deny it." He stood abruptly. "I thought we were past this. Nora, I thought you trusted—" "I thought so too," she interrupted. But trust is hard to come by when everyone seems to have a price. Not everyone is for sale. In my experience, it's just a matter of finding the right currency. They stared at each other across the kitchen, weeks of partnership suddenly fragile as spring ice. Mateo's face closed off, becoming the mask of the stranger who'd first ridden into town. "If that's what you think," he said quietly, "then we have nothing more to discuss." He left without another word. Nora sat frozen. The letter crumpled in her fist. "That was foolish," Abigail said after a moment. "Was it?" Nora's voice cracked. "How well do we really know him? He showed up right when Red started making moves. He has information Red wants. Maybe you're scared," Abigail interrupted. "Scared of trusting someone again after what happened in Missouri. So scared that you'll believe an anonymous letter over the man who stood beside you these past weeks." Before the Nora could respond, Tommy burst through the door. "Storm coming," he announced. "And it's a big one. We need to secure the well." The morning sky, clear moments before, was rapidly darkening. Not the usual thunderheads, but a wall of brown advancing across the desert, a dust storm, the kind that could bury cattle and collapse buildings. "Get everyone to cover," Nora ordered, pushing aside personal turmoil for immediate crisis. "We need to protect the well opening." They raced through town, spreading the warning. By the time they reached Box Elder Wash, the wind was picking up, carrying the taste of dirt and danger. The well site was chaos. Workers scrambled to secure tools and supplies while the makeshift shelters flapped like wounded birds. Mateo was already there, directing efforts to cover the well opening with timber and canvas. He glanced at Nora once, his expression unreadable, then returned to work. Whatever stood between them would have to wait. "Rope off the cover," Nora shouted over the rising wind. "Tommy, help me with these support beams." The storm hit like a physical blow. One moment they could see across the wash, the next the world vanished into a brown wall. Nora pulled her bandana over her face, squinting against the stinging sand. "The pump assembly," someone yelled. The partially constructed mechanism was tipping in the wind. Nora lunged for it, catching the frame just as it started to fall. The metal was heavy, awkward, and the wind fought her for every inch. Then another pair of hands joined hers, Mateo, wordlessly taking half the weight. Together they wrestled the assembly to safety, lashing it down with a rope. The work was brutal, fighting both the storm and the weight, but neither spoke of the morning's confrontation. A scream cut through the howling wind, through the dust. Nora saw Abigail trapped as a wooden shelter collapsed around her, pinning her legs. "Hold this," Nora shouted to Mateo, then plunged into the wreckage. The wind tried to tear her away, and debris pelted her like buckshot. She reached Abigail just as another support beam started to fall. "No time to dodge." Nora threw herself over the older woman, taking the impact across her shoulders. Stars exploded in her vision, but she held position until strong hands pulled the beam away Mateo again, his scarred arms straining with effort. They dragged Abigail free as the rest of the shelter disintegrated. "Doctor!" Hawthorne materialized from the storm, medical bag in hand, and immediately began examining her. "Bruised, not broken," he shouted. "Get her to the supply wagon." The storm raged for 2 hours, turning day to night. When it finally passed, they emerged like ghosts, covered head to toe in red dust. The well site was a disaster, shelters gone, supplies scattered, the carefully constructed stone walls partially buried. But the well itself had survived, protected by the timber and canvas cover. "Could have been worse," Tommy said, always the optimist. "Could have been better," Nora replied, surveying the damage. Her shoulders throbbed where the beam had struck, and every breath brought sharp pain. "You're hurt," Mateo observed. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." He stepped closer, and she could see the concern in his eyes despite everything. "Let Doc look at you." "Since when do you care?" The words came out sharper than intended. Mateo's face closed off again. "My mistake," he said coldly. "I'll check on the others." Watching him walk away, Nora felt something twist in her chest that had nothing to do with her injuries. "That was uncalled for." "Doctor," Hawthorne said, appearing at her elbow. "That man just risked his bad arm to save Abigail." "I know," Nora admitted quietly. "Do you? Because from where I stand, you're letting fear poison something good." The doctor's usually kind eyes were stern. "I've lived long enough to recognize real loyalty when I see it. Young lady, don't throw it away because someone wants you to doubt." He was right, of course, but admitting it meant admitting she'd been wrong, meant being vulnerable, meant... "Riders coming!" someone shouted. Through the settling dust, a group approached from town. Not Red's men this time, but a mixed bunch including Reverend Dawson, Mrs. Chen, and others who'd been helping at the well. Their faces were grim. "What's happened?" Nora asked. "Red's called a town meeting," Reverend Dawson explained. "Says he has an announcement about the water situation. Barnes is going door to door, making sure everyone attends." "It's a trap," Mateo said immediately. "Probably," the Reverend agreed. "But if we don't go, he'll use it against us. Say we're the ones causing trouble, refusing to participate in civic discourse." They had no choice. After hasty efforts to clean up and secure the well site, the group headed back to town. The main street was crowded with wagons and horses as seemingly everyone in Dry Gulch converged on the church. Inside, Red stood at the pulpit like a preacher about to deliver salvation. He'd cleaned up for the occasion, fresh suit, hair slicked back, looking every inch the prosperous businessman. "Friends," he began as the last stragglers found seats. "We've had our differences lately, misunderstandings, unfortunate incidents. But I'm here today with a solution that benefits everyone." Nora, sitting between Abigail and Tommy, felt her skin crawl. Mateo was across the aisle, pointedly not looking her way. "Water," Red continued, "is the lifeblood of our community, and I'm prepared to ensure everyone has access to it. Starting tomorrow, I'll be selling water at $1 per barrel, a significant reduction from current prices." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the crowd. It was still high, but manageable for most families. Furthermore, Red raised his hand for silence. "I'm establishing a work program. Anyone who signs on with my operation, whether in the cattle business, the mines, or other ventures, receives free water for their household." "What's the catch?" someone called out. Red smiled benevolently. "No catch, just good business. A strong workforce means a strong town. Of course, this offer is contingent on certain troublemakers ceasing their disruptive activities." His eyes found Nora and Mateo. "This illegal well operation, for instance, it's dangerous as today's storm proved, unregulated, a breeding ground for disease and contamination. For the safety of our community, it must be shut down." "You can't." Nora started to rise, but Abigail pulled her back down. "Anyone who continues to participate in this rogue operation," Red continued smoothly, "will be considered outside the community. No water sales, no employment, no place in the future of Dry Gulch." The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke. Join Red or die of thirst. Submit or be exiled. "You're asking us to choose slavery over freedom," Mateo said, standing slowly. "I'm offering prosperity over poverty." Red countered. "Progress over primitive scrabbling in the dirt. Ask yourself, who would you rather trust, a successful businessman who's brought jobs and opportunity to this town, or a failed soldier playing with his dead father's fantasies?" The personal attack made Nora's blood boil. She shot to her feet. "I trust the man who shares knowledge over the one who hoards it, who builds instead of burns." "Careful, Miss Quinn," Barnes warned from the side of the room. "Slander's a serious charge." "As is arson?" She shot back. "Where were you when my smithy burned? Deputy, Enough." Red's mask slipped, showing the steel underneath. "I've made my offer. Those who are with me, sign the employment rolls with Barnes. Those who aren't, he shrugged. Well, the desert's unforgiving to the foolish. He stepped down from the pulpit, his exit timed for maximum impact. Some of the crowd followed immediately, those already in his pocket or too desperate to resist. Others sat frozen with indecision. We continue digging. Mateo announced to those remaining, the well at Box Elder Wash belongs to everyone, not one man. We'll have water flowing within the week. If the storms don't bury you first, someone muttered. If Red's men don't shoot you, another added. But about 20 people stayed seated as the church emptied the core group that had been helping all along, plus a few new faces. Not many against Red's resources, but enough. We'll need guards now. Doctor, Hawthorne said quietly. He won't wait for legal means anymore. I know some men, Reverend Dawson offered. Veterans like Mateo, looking for work. They might help for shares in the water. Plans formed quickly. Guard shifts, work rotations, supply runs, all the logistics of what was becoming a siege. Through it all, Nora was acutely aware of Mateo's presence, the careful distance he maintained. As the meeting broke up, she cornered him outside. We need to talk. Do we? His voice was tired. You made your feelings clear this morning. I was wrong. The simple admission seemed to surprise him. His rigid posture softened slightly. The letter, he asked. Probably Red's work, divide and conquer. She met his eyes. I'm sorry. My past makes me cautious. Cautious, I understand. But Nora, partnership means trust. I can't work beside someone who questions my every move. You're right. The words were difficult but necessary. In Missouri, I trusted the wrong person. My father, who sold me like cattle. The man I thought loved me, who stood silent at the altar. I swore I'd never be that vulnerable again. And now, she thought of him catching the pump assembly in the storm, pulling the beam off Abigail, standing up to Red in the church. Actions, her father had always said, spoke louder than words, one of the few things he'd been right about. Now I'm learning that being alone might be safe, but it's no way to live. Something shifted in Mateo's expression. He reached out, brushing dust from her hair with gentle fingers. We're all learning, I suppose. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then Tommy's shout broke the spell. Flash flood. They spun to see water racing down the main street, not clean rain, but a muddy torrent carrying debris from the mountains. The storm had dumped its moisture upstream, and now the price came due. The well? Nora gasped. They ran for horses, racing the flood to Box Elder Wash. The water beat them, pouring into the canyon with devastating force. Their carefully constructed walls channeled some of it, but the well pit was filling fast. Ropes! Mateo shouted. We need to shore up the sides before they collapse. They worked frantically as water rose around their ankles, then knees. Nora found herself beside Mateo, matching his movements as they'd learned to do over weeks of labor. No words needed now, just shared purpose. The flood peaked and began to recede, leaving devastation but not total destruction. The well was full of muddy water and debris, but the walls had held. The pump assembly, secured during the dust storm, remained intact. We'll have to start over, Tommy said miserably. Again. No, Mateo corrected, studying the situation. The flood actually helped. Look, it's scoured down to bedrock here. We're closer to the main water table than before. He was right. As the muddy water settled, clear water began seeping from below, faster and stronger than before. It's like the desert's testing us, Abigail mused, wringing out her skirts. Throwing everything it has to see if we'll break. Then we'd better prove we won't, Nora replied. As sunset painted the wet rocks gold, they stood together at the well's edge, battered, exhausted, but unbroken. Mateo's hand found Nora's, and she didn't pull away. Partners, he asked quietly. Partners, she confirmed. In the distance, thunder rumbled again. More storms were coming, natural and man-made both, but for now, They had water rising clean from the earth and people willing to fight for it. It would have to be enough. The rain came suddenly as they rode toward the hills, fat drops that turned the dust to mud within minutes. Nora and Mateo had left the well site at dusk, needing to scout a new route for bringing in supplies after Red's men had blockaded the main road. Now, with night falling and the storm intensifying, they found themselves miles from town. There, Mateo pointed through the downpour to a dark shape against the hillside. The old line shack. They urged their horses towards shelter, arriving soaked to the skin. The structure was basic, a single-room cowboys used during roundups, with a stone fireplace and walls of rough timber sealed with mud. But it was dry and solid against the storm. "I'll see to the horses," Mateo said, leading both animals to the small lean-to attached to the shack. Nora pushed inside, grateful to escape the driving rain. The shack smelled of old smoke and leather, but someone had left a stack of firewood by the hearth. Her hands shook as she fumbled with matches from cold. She told herself, not from the awareness of being alone with Mateo miles from anyone. By the time he returned, she had a fire crackling. He stood in the doorway, water streaming from his hat, looking uncertain. "Come in," she said. "You'll catch your death standing there." He entered, setting down the saddlebags he'd retrieved. "The horses are settled. This storm looks to last a while." They stood awkwardly by the fire, steam rising from their soaked clothes. The single room seemed to shrink around them, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls. "We should—" Nora gestured vaguely at their wet clothing. "That is, we need to dry out." "I'll turn around," Mateo offered quickly. It was practical, necessary even, but the intimacy of the situation made Nora's heart race. She peeled off her soaked outer garments, hanging them on pegs near the fire, acutely aware of every sound Mateo made as he did the same. When they faced each other again, both down to dry undergarments and wrapped in the rough blankets from their bedrolls, the tension in the room was palpable. "Hungry?" Mateo asked, his voice slightly rough. "I have some jerky and hardtack in my bags." They sat on the floor before the fire, sharing the simple meal and passing a canteen of water between them. The storm raged outside, making the small circle of firelight feel like the only safe place in the world. "My father built a shelter like this once," Mateo said quietly. "During a surveying trip, I was maybe 12, determined to prove I could keep up with the men. Then a storm hit, worse than this one. Flash floods, lightning strikes. I was terrified." "What did he do?" "Told me stories about the old days, when the Spanish first came to this land, about my mother's people, who knew every water source for 100 miles. He said fear was just the desert's way of teaching respect." Mateo smiled at the memory. "By morning, I wasn't afraid anymore, just grateful to be alive and eager to learn more." "He sounds like a good father," Nora said softly. "He was. What about yours?" Nora stared into the fire. "My father believed daughters were investments. Raise them right, marry them well, profit from the connection. When Samuel Morrison offered a good bride price and some adjoining land, that was that. My feelings on the matter were irrelevant." "But you ran." "The night before the wedding. Took my mother's tools. She'd been a farrier before marriage. Taught me in secret. Left a note saying I died rather than disappoint him." She laughed bitterly. Dramatic, but it felt true at the time. Mateo moved closer, not touching but offering presence. "Do you regret it?" "No, never. Even when times were hardest. Even when I was sleeping in stables and fighting for every job. I was free. And now?" She looked at him then. Really looked. His dark hair was curling as it dried, and the firelight turned his skin to bronze. But it was his eyes that held her warm and steady and seeing her truly. "Now I'm learning that freedom doesn't have to mean alone." The fire crackled between them. Rain drummed on the roof. And something that had been building for weeks finally demanded acknowledgement. "Nora," Mateo began, then stopped, seeming to wrestle with words. These past days, working beside you, I haven't felt this alive since before the Apache Wars. You make me remember why anything matters. Don't, she whispered, but it was weak protest. Don't what? Tell the truth that when Red's men burned your smithy, I wanted to ride to his house and he cut himself off, jaw tight. That when you doubted me, it hurt worse than this old wound ever has. I said I was sorry. I don't want apologies. He turned to face her fully. I want to know if I'm alone in feeling like the world makes sense when we're together. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. Everything in her screamed to retreat, to armor herself with distance and sharp words. But she thought of Abigail's wisdom, of the trust Mateo had shown again and again. You're not alone, she admitted quietly. The confession hung between them like a third presence. Then Mateo reached out, slowly enough that she could pull away, and touched her face. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, and she leaned into the touch despite herself. I won't be another Samuel Morrison, he said firmly. I won't be another man who thinks he owns you. Partners means equals, always. I know. And she did know. Had known from the beginning. Mateo was nothing like the men she'd fled. But I'm scared. What if we take things one day at a time, he suggested. What if we just let tonight be tonight? The rain had softened to a steady patter. The fire painted golden light across his features, and Nora found her fear melting like spring snow. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and whispered with a teasing smile that surprised them both. Well, aren't you gonna kiss me? His answering grin transformed his usually serious face, made him look younger, lighter. All night if you can handle it? Big talk for a man with a bad arm, she challenged, the banter easier than vulnerability. My arm's not what you should be worried about, he replied. And then his lips found hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost questioning. Then Nora's hands tangled in his still damp hair, and gentleness gave way to weeks of suppressed longing. He tasted like rainwater and possibility, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Nora. He said her name like a prayer. She silenced him with another kiss, deeper this time. The blanket slipped from her shoulders, and his hands were warm against her skin. Calloused from work, but infinitely careful. Everything about him was careful, the way he touched her like she might disappear, the way he whispered her name between kisses, the way he waited for her to set the pace. They made a bed of their blankets before the fire, the storm creating a curtain of sound around their private world. What followed was a discovery of trust, of pleasure, of what it meant to choose someone completely. Mateo was patient where other men might have rushed, attentive where others would have demanded, and Nora found herself responding with an openness that should have terrified her, but instead felt like coming home. Later, they lay entwined, watching the fire burn low. Nora traced the scars on his chest more than just the arm wound, a whole history written in healed flesh. Apache, she asked. Some, others from breaking horses, bar fights, general stupidity. He caught her hand, kissing her palm. What about you? Any scars I should know about? Just the invisible kind. Those are the worst ones, he agreed. They talked through the night about dreams and fears, about the well and the future, about nothing and everything. When drowsiness finally claimed them, they slept curled together like question marks completing each other's sentences. Nora woke to sunlight streaming through the single window. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. Mateo was already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her throat tight. Morning, she said, suddenly shy. Morning? He brushed hair from her face. Any regrets? She considered the question seriously. In the clear light of day, their night together could have felt like weakness or mistake. Instead, it felt like strength, like choosing joy in the face of hardship. No regrets, she said firmly. Only that we have to go back. He gestured toward the world beyond their shelter. "Face Red and his men. Keep fighting for water." "Together," Nora reminded him. "We face it together." They dressed slowly, both reluctant to break the spell. But duty-called people were depending on them, and the well wouldn't dig itself. As Mateo saddled the horses, Nora noticed something glinting in the ashes of their fire. She knelt, brushing away debris to reveal a small chunk of hematite, the iron ore that gave the desert its red color. "What's that?" Mateo asked, leading the horses over. "A promise," she said, pocketing the stone. "Remember what you said about making a new ring when mine got lost in the flood?" "I remember. Well, now I have the raw material. When this is over, when the well is flowing and Red is defeated, maybe we can talk about what kind of ring to make." His smile was answer enough. They mounted up and headed back toward town, the morning sun warm on their faces. Whatever battles lay ahead, they would face them changed, no longer two people fighting parallel wars, but partners in the truest sense. The hematite chunk sat heavy in Nora's pocket, a tangible reminder of intangible promises. She thought of her mother's tools, lost in the fire but living on in the skills they'd built, of her father's betrayal transformed into fierce independence, of nights in stable lofts dreaming of a place to belong. She'd found it, she realized, not in a place, but in a person, in the man riding beside her who saw her strength as a gift rather than a threat, who offered partnership instead of ownership. "What are you thinking?" Mateo asked, noticing her smile. "That the desert taught us both well," she replied. "It showed us how to survive alone, so we'd know the value of choosing to survive together." He reached across the space between their horses, and she took his hand. They rode that way for a while, connected and quiet, while the desert bloomed around them in the wake of the storm. Soon enough, they'd return to conflict and struggle, but for now, in the clean morning light, they had each other in the promise of water rising from deep places, both literal and metaphorical. It was more than enough. It was everything. The sound of dynamite being prepared was unmistakable, that particular scrape and click that made every former soldier's blood run cold. Mateo heard it first, grabbing Nora's arm as they worked at the well in the pre-dawn darkness. "Get everyone back," he whispered urgently. "Now!" Their night watch scattered just as Barnes and 6 armed men crested the ridge, the deputy carrying a wooden crate that could only contain explosives. The early morning light caught the satisfaction on his face. "Well, well," Barnes called out. "Early birds, aren't we, mister? Red sends his compliments and a message this illegal operation ends today. You can't destroy the well." "Doctor," Hawthorne protested, stepping forward with several others who'd arrived for the morning shift. "People need this water." "What people need," Barnes said, setting down the crate with deliberate care, "is to learn respect for property rights. This here's still disputed land, and Mr. Red's decided it's a safety hazard." Mateo moved to put himself between Barnes and the well. "You blow that well, you're killing this town." "Town's been dying since the drought started." Barnes shrugged. "Mister, Red's just putting it out of its misery. Unless folks want to see sense and take his generous offer." "Slavery isn't generous," Nora spat. Barnes's men spread out, rifles ready. The workers were outnumbered and mostly unarmed. They'd come to dig, not fight a war. "I'll give you all 5 minutes to clear out," Barnes announced, pulling out his pocket watch. "After that, anyone still here is trespassing and will be dealt with accordingly." "You're not really going to," Abigail started. Barnes cut her off by lighting a cigar, the flame dancing meaningfully close to the dynamite fuses. 4 minutes and 45 seconds. Most of the workers began backing away, fear overcoming defiance. Nora stood her ground, Mateo beside her, but they both knew the mathematics. Rush Barnes and his men would shoot. Stand still and watch their hope explode. "There has to be another way," Tommy pleaded. "We're so close, the water's flowing clean now." 3 minutes, Barnes said coldly. That's when they heard the horses not from town but from the desert, riding hard. A dozen riders appeared, moving with military precision, and Nora's heart leaped as she recognized the lead figure. "Stand down, deputy." The voice carried absolute authority. "Oh." Marshal William Thorne was a legend in the territory, incorruptible, fearless, and with a reputation for arriving exactly when needed. His silver star caught the morning light as he and his men surrounded Barnes's group. "Marshal," Barnes said, trying for casual confidence, "this is local business." "Destroying water sources is federal business," Thorne interrupted, "especially when I've received reports of fraud, extortion, and attempted murder." He nodded to Dr. Hawthorne. "Your telegraph was very detailed, Doctor." The old physician smiled. "I may have sent several to various authorities, with documentation." Barnes's men looked uncertain now, caught between their employer and federal badges. One of them slowly lowered his rifle. "You have no jurisdiction," Barnes began. "The hell I don't." Thorne dismounted, moving with the easy grace of a man comfortable with violence but preferring law. "Destruction of water sources on territorial land. Interference with mineral rights. Conspiracy to defraud should I continue. I'm acting on Mr. Red's authority. Then Mr. Red can explain himself to a federal judge." Thorne gestured to his men. "Confiscate those explosives. Anyone who resists, arrest them." Barnes went for his gun, a fatal mistake. Thorne's draw was lightning fast, and Barnes found himself staring down the barrel of a Colt .45 before his hand even touched leather. "I wouldn't," Thorne advised mildly. "Deputy Barnes, you're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted destruction of property, and about 6 other charges I'll think of by the time we reach jail. Drop your weapons." The surrender was swift. Barnes's hired men had no stomach for fighting federal marshals, and within minutes they were disarmed and cuffed. The dynamite was carefully removed, making everyone breathe easier. "Now then," Thorne said, turning to the crowd, "I understand there's been some dispute about this well. Let's settle it properly. Who speaks for the diggers?" "We do," Nora said, stepping forward with Mateo. Thorne studied them with sharp eyes. "Mateo Vega. Heard about you from Colonel Mackenzie. Said you were the best scout he ever had until that Apache Lance found you." "That was a long time ago, Marshal." "Good men are remembered. And you, Miss Nora Quinn. I was the town blacksmith." "The one whose shop burned, yes, that was in the doctor's report too." Thorne pulled out a leather notebook. "According to federal surveys, this land clearly belongs to the Vega family. The water rights were established by treaty and can't be superseded by local claims." "Red won't accept that," Mateo warned. "Red doesn't have a choice." Thorne's smile was cold. "I've been investigating Mr. Silas Red for months. Land fraud, claim jumping, possible murder. He's been busy. This situation just gave me the excuse to move." As if summoned by his name, dust rose from the direction of town. Red himself appeared with a large group of riders, his face dark with fury when he saw the marshals. "Marshal Thorne," he said, reining up but staying mounted. "This is unexpected. Justice often is Mr. Red. I'm shutting down your operation pending federal investigation." "On what grounds?" "Oh, I have a list, but let's start with this." Thorne produced a document, sworn affidavit from a Mr. James Walsh, recently arrested in Tucson, confessing to forging land documents on your behalf. Ring any bells? Red's face went pale. Walsh had been his foreman until a month ago, apparently. He'd talked to save his own skin.
"That's preposterous."
"Is it? Then you won't mind us examining your territorial filings, comparing signatures, checking dates. I'm particularly interested in documents supposedly signed by dead men." The silence stretched taut. Red's men shifted nervously, and Nora noticed several edging away from their boss. "You can't prove anything," Red said finally. I don't have to prove it all today. Thorne replied easily. Just enough to arrest you and let a judge sort it out. Could take months, years, maybe. Meanwhile, your assets will be frozen, your operations shut down.
This is about the water.
Red said desperately. Fine, the town can have water. $1 a barrel, 50 cents. Whatever they want. Too late for that, Mateo said quietly. The well belongs to everyone now. Free and clear. Red's mask finally cracked completely. You think you've won. This town will die without me. I employ half the people here.
Through extortion,
Nora shot back.
through fear and debt and...
The crack of a rifle cut her off. One of Red's men had panicked and fired, the bullet whining past Thorne's head. Then everything exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from both sides. Nora dove behind a pile of stones as bullets sparked off rocks around her. Mateo rolled the other way, coming up with his pistol drawn. "Cover the workers!" Thorne shouted to his men. "Get them clear!" The federal marshals were outnumbered, but better trained. They moved with practiced efficiency, laying down covering fire while Tommy and the others scrambled for safety. But Red's men had desperation on their side. Nora saw Barnes, still in cuffs, trying to crawl toward the abandoned dynamite. Without thinking, she burst from cover, racing across the open ground. A bullet tugged at her shirt. Another kicked up dust at her feet. She reached the explosives just as Barnes did, kicking him hard in the shoulder. He rolled away, cursing, and she grabbed the crate, hauling it toward the well. "Nora, no!" Mateo shouted. She understood his fear one stray bullet would blow them all to kingdom come, but she also knew they couldn't let Red's men reclaim the dynamite. She reached the well's edge and without hesitation, dropped the crate down the shaft. A splash echoed up, followed by blessed silence. The dynamite was too wet to explode now. The gunfight was already winding down. 2 of Red's men were on the ground, clutching wounds. Others had thrown down their weapons. Red himself sat frozen on his horse, watching his empire crumble. "It's over. Red," Thorne called out. "Order your men to surrender." For a moment, Nora thought he might fight to the end. Then his shoulders slumped. "Stand down," he said wearily. "Everyone stand down." The surrender was swift after that. Red and his men were disarmed and arrested, joining Barnes in custody. As they were led away, Red turned back to stare at the well with pure hatred. "You've killed this town," he said. "Without my money, my jobs." "We'll manage," Abigail interrupted. "We've been managing despite you for years." As the prisoners were loaded onto horses, "Dr." Hawthorne approached Thorne. "How did you arrive so precisely when needed?" The marshal smiled. "Your telegraphs helped, but I've had a man inside Red's operation for weeks. He sent word about the dynamite plan last night." "Who?" Mateo asked. A familiar figure separated from Thorne's group, James Walsh, Red's former foreman. "Guilty conscience," Walsh said gruffly. "And a deal with the marshal. I testify, I get leniency." "You burned my smithy." Nora accused. "No, ma'am, that was Barnes and his cousins. I did plenty of wrong, but not that." He looked genuinely remorseful. "I'm sorry for my part in all this." Man starts compromising, and before he knows it, he's lost. Thorne had his men set up a temporary camp to process the arrests. Meanwhile, the well diggers returned to work with renewed energy. By noon, they had the pump assembly installed and working properly. The first bucket of clear water drawn from the depths was like a miracle. People laughed and cried, passing cups around, tasting freedom. "We need to build proper infrastructure," Mateo said, already planning. "Storage tanks, distribution systems." "We need to celebrate first," Nora corrected, kissing him soundly in front of everyone. "Tomorrow we plan. Today we've won." The celebration was impromptu but joyful. Someone brought out a fiddle, and music filled the wash. Food appeared, people sharing what little they had in abundance of spirit. Even Marshal Thorne accepted a cup of well water, toasting their success. As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Nora stood with Matteo at the well's edge. The water below reflected the sky, an endless promise of sustenance. "What happens now?" she asked. "With Red gone, the town will change." "Everything changes," Matteo agreed. "But some things endure. Water finds its way, truth surfaces. People who belong together." He squeezed her hand. "Speaking of which," Nora pulled the hematite chunk from her pocket. "Still interested in making that ring?" His answer was another kiss, this one slower, deeper, full of promise. Around them, their community celebrated water and freedom. But in that moment, they were alone in the world they'd built together. "I'll need to set up a new smithy," Nora said when they parted. "Can't make rings without proper tools." "We'll build one at the ranch," Matteo suggested. "Near the well, centralized operations." "Listen to you, sounding like a businessman." "Listen to you, planning a future." They smiled at each other. Two souls who'd found water in the desert and each other in the search. Tomorrow would bring new challenges rebuilding the town, establishing fair water distribution, creating sustainable growth without another Red taking over. But tonight, with clear water flowing and justice served, with music in the air and her partner's hand in hers, Nora Quinn felt something she'd never expected to find in the harsh Arizona desert. She felt home. 6 months after Red's arrest, Dry Gulch had transformed into something none of them had quite imagined. The community, well at Box Elder Wash, now fed a proper water tower, its windmill blades turning lazily in the desert breeze. Gardens sprouted where dust had ruled, and the sound of children playing replaced the desperate silence of drought. Nora stood in her new smithy, properly built this time, with adobe walls and a tile roof that wouldn't burn. The ring of hammer on anvil filled the air as she worked. But today's project was special. She held up the piece, examining it in the light from the forge. "How's it coming?" Matteo asked from the doorway, his arms full of fresh lumber. "See for yourself." She showed him the iron ring, crafted from the hematite they'd found that night in the storm. The metal gleamed with a deep red sheen, polished but not fancy practical beauty, like everything they'd built together. "It's perfect," he said, setting down the wood to examine it closer. "Though I still say you should make one for me, too." "Who says I haven't?" Nora grinned, producing a matching band from her pocket. "Can't have you thinking this partnership is one-sided." The wedding was set for next week, a simple affair at the church with Reverend Dawson presiding. Half the town had invited themselves, turning it into a community celebration. Mrs. Chen was coordinating the food, Abigail the decorations, and Dr. Hawthorne had volunteered to give Nora away. "Tommy stopped by earlier," Matteo said, helping Nora bank the forge fire. "The town council voted on the water distribution plan. Unanimous approval." "Even Jenkins?" Nora asked. Surprised, the store owner had been one of Red's strongest supporters. "Even Jenkins. Turns out fair water access is good for business. Who knew?" They walked outside where the late afternoon sun painted the desert in familiar golds and reds. Their property for it was theirs now, legally combined, stretched from the smithy to the well site, with Matteo's ranch house in between. They'd already broken ground on additions, planning for growth. But Marshal Thorne sent word. Matteo continued as they walked. Red was convicted on all counts, 20 years hard labor, and Barnes, 15 years. The others got less, depending on their involvement. Nora felt no satisfaction in their punishment, only relief that justice had been served. "What about the Territorial Water Commission? Any word on the proposal?" "Approved. Box Elder Wash is officially designated as a public water source, protected by territorial law. They're even sending an engineer to help design the expanded system." They reached the well site, where the evening shift was drawing water. The simple hole in the ground had become a proper wellhead with pump house and pipes leading to the storage tank. A wooden platform surrounded it, with benches where people gathered to talk and rest. "Evening, Miss Nora, Mr. Vega," called Sam Harrison, one of the farmers who joined their cause early.
"Water's running clear as crystal today." "Good to hear. Sam, how's that corn crop coming?" "Best in years, thanks to irrigation. Wife's already planning what to plant come spring."
This was the conversation repeated across the territory, planning for the future instead of just surviving the present. Water had returned hope to Dry Gulch. As they continued their walk, they found Tommy at the new school construction site, helping frame walls. The boy had shot up 3 inches and filled out with regular meals and honest work. "How's it look?" he asked, gesturing at the structure taking shape. "Like you might actually have a proper classroom come fall," Nora said, "assuming we can convince that teacher from Tucson to come." Miss Patterson already agreed. Tommy said proudly, "Doctor, Hawthorne showed her the water system and the plans for town growth. She says a place that fights that hard for its future is worth teaching in." They left Tommy to his work and headed to the cemetery on the hill. Mateo visited his father's grave regularly, and Nora had come to share the ritual. The simple stone marker read, "Miguel Vega, Waterfinder, Pathmaker."
"He would have been proud,"
Nora said softly.
"He would have liked you,"
Mateo replied, arranging fresh desert flowers by the stone. "A woman who works iron and speaks truth. He'd have adopted you on the spot." They stood quietly for a moment, honoring the past while embracing the future. Then a commotion from town drew their attention, dust and horses and excited shouts. Racing back, they found a wagon train arriving. 5 families from back east drawn by news of water and opportunity. Marshal Thorne had spread word that Dry Gulch was rebuilding, welcoming honest settlers. "We heard you have water and need workers," the lead wagon's driver said, a sturdy man with carpenter's hands. "We've got skills and strong backs, looking for a place to build." "You've found it," Reverend Dawson assured them. "Welcome to Dry Gulch." The evening turned festive as the town welcomed newcomers. Tables appeared in the street, food materialized, and someone brought out instruments. As music filled the air, Nora found herself watching the transformation with wonder. "Remember when we first started digging?" Abigail asked, joining them with cups of cool water. "Half the town thought we were fools." "Weren't we?" Nora asked with a smile.
"Taking on Red? Fighting the desert itself."
"Maybe, but the best kind of fool's the kind who change things." As night fell, lanterns appeared, turning Main Street into a river of light. The dance floor was rough boards laid over dirt, but no one cared. Mateo spun Nora through a waltz, her work boots clicking against his worn leather. "Not bad for a blacksmith," he teased as she stepped on his foot. "Not bad for a soldier," she countered, deliberately stepping again. They laughed, drawing close as the music slowed. Around them, their community celebrated the original families and newcomers, Mexican and Anglo and Chinese, all united by water and hope. "I've been thinking," Mateo said as they swayed, "about what comes next." "Oh." "The territorial governor wants to establish a water management board. They've asked me to serve, help map other water sources, prevent another Red situation." "That's wonderful. You'll be perfect." "They want both of us," he interrupted. "The woman who stood up to Red and the man who found water. Equal partners, equal voice." Nora stopped dancing.
"They want me on a government board, but I'm just—"
"The person who united a town, who faced down guns and fire and never broke. Who else should speak for people who need water?" She thought about it, the meetings, the politics, the responsibility. Then she thought about other towns dying of thirst while men like Red prospered. "Equal partners," she confirmed. "Always." "Then yes." He kissed her there on the dance floor, earning cheers and good-natured ribbing from the crowd. When they parted, "Doctor," Hawthorne raised his glass. "A toast," the old physician called. "To water found and battles won. To partnerships forged in iron and adversity. To Dry Gulch may it run wet and prosper." To Dry Gulch, the crowd echoed. Later, as the celebration wound down, Nora and Mateo walked back to their property. The new smithy stood solid in the moonlight, the ranch house welcoming with lit windows, the windmill turning steadily over the well. "No regrets?" Mateo asked, echoing his question from that morning in the line shack. Nora touched the hematite ring on her finger, feeling its weight and warmth. She thought of the long road from Missouri, the fear, the loneliness, the struggle to survive. All of it had led here, to this moment, this place, this man. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Only gratitude." They stood together watching the stars wheel overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their struggles and would witness their triumphs. In the distance, a coyote called, answered by another wild voices in the tamed land, reminding them that the desert endured even as it changed. "We should build a house," Nora said suddenly. "A real one, not just additions to your father's place. Something new, something ours." "With a forge attached," Mateo agreed. "And a study for all those government documents we'll be reading." "And a well," Nora added. "Our own well, to remind us where we started." "And room for children," he said quietly. When the time comes." She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of partnership. "When the time comes," she agreed. The desert wind whispered through the sage, carrying the scent of rain from distant mountains. Change was constant here, storms and drought, flood and fire. But water endured, finding its way through rock and hardship to where it was needed most. Just like love, Nora thought. Just like hope. Just like the bonds that turned strangers into community and community into home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The water board appointment meant traveling to other settlements, fighting other battles, facing down other men who thought resources meant power over rather than power for. But tonight, with her partner beside her and their community thriving below, Nora Quinn, soon to be Nora Vega, felt the deep satisfaction of promises kept and potential realized. The desert had tested them with everything it had. They had not merely survived, they had transformed trial into triumph, scarcity into abundance, isolation into connection. The well at Box Elder Wash continued its steady flow, its water catching moonlight like liquid silver. Each drop was a promise that persistence could overcome oppression, that courage could defeat fear, that together, people could build something greater than any one person could destroy. In the new smithy, the banked coals glowed softly, ready to spring to life come morning. There was work to do, always work in a growing town, tools to forge, lives to build, futures to shape on the anvil of possibility. But for now, Nora and Mateo stood in the doorway of their shared life, hands linked like iron bonds, watching their town sleep peaceful under stars. The desert had made them strong, water had brought them together, and love patient, persistent, and true as tempered steel would carry them forward into all the tomorrows yet to come. In Dry Gulch, Arizona territory, the wells ran deep and clear, and hope flowed as freely as water in the desert made green. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the Arizona desert with Nora and Mateo. I'd love to hear where you're listening to this story from, whether you're in the American Southwest yourself or somewhere completely different across the globe. Please share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know what resonated with you in this tale of courage, community, and love against all odds. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more tales of romance and adventure from the American frontier. Don't forget to hit that like button and press the hype button to help more listeners discover these stories of the Old West. Your support helps keep these campfire tales alive for everyone who loves the drama, passion, and spirit of the Wild West. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own horizons.